Welcome to the Power Lunch Live on LinkedIn. I'm Rhett Power, your host. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon, morning for some people, mid-afternoon, lunchtime for others. We do this program Monday through Friday, and we do this at 12 noon or so Eastern Standard Time on LinkedIn's new live platform. The point of the show, as if you've been watching, is to talk to today's thought leaders, corporate leaders, CEOs, people who are doing thought leaders, people who are doing really interesting work in the world, who are making the world a better place, and that we can learn from so that we can get better in what we do. Now, the fun part of the show is that it's interactive, and the only way that happens is if you ask questions and interact with our guest and take advantage of the time that we're spending together and ask your questions, because that's a really good way to get to the heart of what you want to know and what you want to learn. So please do engage with us. We'll try to get to those questions on the program. If we don't get to them on the program, we can certainly get to them and have conversations on the feed for this broadcast after the fact. Another fun fact about the show is that it's simulcast on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and LinkedIn, all with the help of Social Live and that platform. Now, if you love the program or like it, give it a like or share so that your network can also benefit, and we can grow the audience. Now, my promise to you is to always bring you the best. Today, we've done that. We've got Dr. Wanda Wallace. She's the managing partner, CEO, and CEO of the Leadership Forum. She's a frequent columnist at Harvard Business Review, Change Board, and Talent Management. She used to be at Duke University as the dean of their associate dean of their executive education program. She's got a new book that we want to talk about today extensively, and it's called "You Can't Know It All: Leading in the Age of Deep Expertise." Dr. Wallace, Wanda, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you, and I likewise. You've been doing this a long time, and in your coaching practice, you have a lot of experience in coaching and working with leaders. Where do leaders struggle the most in terms of communication in your view?
I think every aspect of communication, to be quite honest. But what I see more often than not is there are two things. One is they struggle to get the emotion right, understand their own emotion, to respond to somebody else's emotion. And I see an awful lot of people who struggle to get the message clear, crisp, concise. So the combination of the two just leaves for a muddled mess in both the giver and the receiver's point of view. Those are the two big ones for me.
Do you think that that's why so many people are sort of unsatisfied with where they work, because they're just not getting clear messages, clear direction, clear understanding of the vision?
I think it's a little bigger story than that. I'm a fan of Aaron Hurst's work, and Aaron will say that fulfillment comes when I have the relationships that I'm looking for.
Okay.
So that's about communication. When I have impact, that's also about communication. How do I know whether I'm having the impact I want, and what is the size of the impact? And then growth. Am I learning anything? I think those are the three big ones. It's Aaron's research, but it really resonates for me. And communication underpins two of those in particular: the building of the relationship, as well as understanding where it is I can have impact. And I think that's what we're missing. We just can't see it. We're doing and doing and doing and doing, and we don't know why it matters.
I remember some of my first management jobs, and I think I don't think I understood what you're saying, because if someone had said back then to 20 years ago, you got to have a relationship with the people that work for you or work that are on your team. I don't know that I would have understood what that really meant. I mean, what do you mean when we say relationship? Because people sort of misunderstand that word, I think.
Yeah. So as you know, Rhett, I have a podcast, and I just did a podcast with a couple of millennials.
Oh,
and I asked them, what is it you want from a manager? And no one could have said it any better, what I mean by relationship. So basically, I want somebody to care about me, which means you have to understand something about me. You have to be able to connect with something about me. You don't necessarily have to like it or agree it or want to do it yourself, but you've got to relate to that. And you have to care about my development, not just my output. And if you start there, that's a pretty good basis. It's not like we need to go all hang out in the bar or have dinner together or spend weekends together.
Right.
It's just that genuine sense of you are caring about me. You're curious about me. You give me some time and attention. And I've often said, I think a lot of stress at work comes because the relationships aren't working, whether it's manager subordinate or peer to peer.
Right.
And if we could just solve that so there was less stress in those relationships, I think we'd all be a lot happier, a lot more content, and a lot more productive.
So, I mean, as a manager, whether I'm a young manager coming in, from I've gotten promoted, and this is one of my first management jobs, or if I'm somebody my age who is managing, we've got 4 or 5 generations in the workplace right now. What can I do to sort of, are there some tips, some things I can do that I can work on those relationships across all of those kind of age groups and generational groups?
All right. So what I'm going to say is simple to say and not necessarily so easy to do. So number one is suspend your judgment. So if you're working with millennials, suspend your judgment that they don't know how to communicate because they all do it through a different medium that we don't necessarily value or understand. So suspend whatever judgment that is. And then number two, you have to know something about the person apart from just the work that they're doing.
Okay.
So every time I go in and talk with a manager who's having trouble with a subordinate, I'll ask the question, well, what do you know about this person? And the answer is virtually nothing. Well, if you're not curious enough to know something about that person as a human being, you're going to struggle. So suspend judgment, know something about the person, and then it's that willingness to kind of dig in and give some feedback. And I have one last tip too, which I underscore all the time with managers. You have to have informal time with everybody, and you need to distribute it around. So you don't want to be spending lunch with the same 2 people all of the time. You want to distribute those unscheduled moments, because I believe in those unscheduled moments. That's where trust gets created.
Yeah, that meal or that walk at lunchtime or that going to go get coffee or something, that's really, really critical, I think.
Well, it says to everybody, you're important enough for me to spend some of my precious minutes with you. And you're as important as everybody else on the team because I distribute that time around. And it's in that informal time that I get to ask as an employee, hey, could we talk about this current assignment or my next assignment or this thing I'm struggling with or something I'd like to learn about? And that's just magic when it's there.
I love some of the previous work you did about questions that as an employee you should be asking your manager, and I think that's what you were kind of alluding to right there, right? It gives you a chance as the employee to ask questions about how you're doing, and I hate the formal review process, and that being the only time that you get to sit down with a manager is to get reviewed. I think that's just an awful system, but what you're saying is I really like it's a time for you to sort of bond and ask how you're doing and ask what you can do better and how you can learn, right?
Well, 2 things about this. First off, I believe if you don't ask a good question, you don't get a good answer. So if all you ever do is say, how am I doing? You're going to get the answer just fine.
Right.
You're not going to get any better. But if you say, I'm trying to really work on the conciseness of my communication, have you seen change? How do you think it's going? How did that group react to it in yesterday's meeting? What else should I do? You're going to get a more constructive answer, or at least more likely to. Right. So how you ask makes all the difference in the world, I think.
Absolutely. And they're just good conversations to have with somebody that you can learn from and that can maybe be a champion, right? How do you get somebody that's going to help your career grow? If you're taking interest in your career, if you're taking interest as an employee in your development, that's going to be noticed.
Right. Well, and I make a comment about the year-end review too. I know every company does it. I know companies work really, really hard to get it in, hopefully twice a year for a lot of really good reasons. But let me just take the perspective of the millennials, or even myself as an employee. If you wait 6 months to tell me something I have missed, what was the point? It's too late now to fix it, to do anything about it. I've been wrong for 6 months. I mean, What a waste.
Yeah.
So it's that regular, constant conversation. We say this all the time, and I know managers get afraid of how to give the feedback. So I'm on the, let's train the employees how to ask for the feedback. Give them the informal time, let them ask the question. We've got to be in a better place than we are at the moment.
One of my mentors told me once about, we were talking about reviews, and he said, well, would you sit down with your wife and say, well, honey, it's time for your yearly review, you know? How well would that go over?
Yeah, right. It says I'm not very comfortable with you if that's the case.
Right. And his point was, you know, communication should be all the time, feedback should be all the time and constant. And that's when we get into that really good communication and being able to talk and communicate. I think that's a good segue. I wanted to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion. You've done a lot of work in that area. And to me, it seems like, and I might be wrong, but it seems like we've over the years we've made, because of the concentrated effort on it, we've made some progress sort of on the diversity side, but not as much on the inclusion side. Is that accurate, or would you agree with that, or have a different take?
It depends on how you want to count the diversity side. In terms of gender and in terms of getting women into corporations, we're doing a good job. But in terms of advancing women very far, we're not doing much progress. In fact, it looks pretty much like it did 15, 20 years ago, tiny bit better. And in terms of advancing any other of the underrepresented classes, we're kind of nowhere.
Okay.
So it's just now coming onto the radar screen. So everybody's talking about it. I don't know how well we're doing in really creating an equal playing field for advancement. But this inclusion,
everybody's talking about, maybe that's what my point was, is that it seems to be a huge part of the conversation right now.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the conversation. So I can get people in the door. The question is, can I keep them and can I help them advance? And can I let them be significant contributors in the organization? That's the core issue. And I think that comes down to the culture that I have created. And that's where we get into the inclusivity. So everybody is now talking about inclusivity. I'm not sure we know what it looks like when we get there, let alone what to do to create it. But it's an important topic for a whole host of reasons. Yeah.
How do you talk to your clients about inclusivity?
You know, I fundamentally believe that inclusivity is a feeling. It's how I, as somebody who's not part of the dominant coalition, meaning I'm not like the majority out there, however that fits, whether I'm an engineer in a marketing company or a woman in a male-driven company or Black in a, predominantly white, doesn't matter, whatever it is, I'm not like the dominant coalition out there. And it's how I feel.
Okay.
It's, do I feel that I am a part of it? My voice is heard. I can have impact here. I have the same opportunity everybody else is. It's a feeling at the end of the day. And I think there's nothing else to say other than that. And it's in my judgment, which makes it hard to tackle.
How do you broach that conversation? I mean, you don't just go up to someone and say, how do you feel? I mean, how are we doing, including you in decisions and in giving you the ability to grow and thrive in this company? I mean, I guess I've seen people struggle on how to do that, how to have those conversations. And
we struggle with how to have a conversation about feelings, period. So this one is now got a double whammy on it. It's a hard topic and it's about a feeling. But why not say with someone that I have built a relationship? So I've got to have a little bit of trust here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to have a private moment, not a public moment. And I got to establish a space where it feels okay for the individual to tell me the truth.
Okay.
And to say, how are you feeling about your role in this team and in this organization? Do you feel that you have an adequate voice? Do you feel that you have adequate opportunities? Do you feel we're listening to you? Do you feel like you're part of it? Mm-hmm. And then be prepared to listen. Because if you listen, I think you will hear. The hard part is then the defenses kick in, and I want to say, well, but that wasn't the intent, and that wasn't what we're trying to achieve. And then the other person's going to just shut down because you're not listening. So it's being prepared to hear that feedback. even if you totally disagree with it.
Something interesting correlation there to me was an example from my kids' school, and they put a lot of the emphasis on no bullying and inclusive behavior and stuff on the kids, right? And giving them the responsibility for it. Is there would you say, even having a conversation with your teams and your workforce about inclusivity and saying, this is the kind of culture we want to build, where everybody has an opinion, everybody has a voice, and it's going to be safe for people to share that? Is that, would you put responsibility for some of that on not just the leadership, but everybody else in the organization?
And I think a lot of companies are doing that, because there's an awful lot of training programs and a lot of ways in which we're saying, speak up when you hear something that's inappropriate. And we're giving out, I think a lot of people are giving out those messages, as they should. Mm-hmm. But the acid test comes down to what happens in that meeting.
Right.
When the minority person speaks up, do they get talked over? Does somebody bring them back into the conversation? Do they sit silent? Are they drawn in? Are they shut down? How are they treated in that moment? Right. And on the informal time, is the manager spending as much informal time with the atypical members as they are with those sort of typical members? Yes or no? And in the team meeting, is everybody speaking pretty equally? Those are two very simple things that would make an enormous difference.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. What you've said in the past, you talked about women getting feedback that they need to advance. What do you mean by that? And how do we change that?
Okay, so
that's a question.
We have a strong opinion about this one. Most women are in roles that draw on their expertise, that draw on their knowledge, where their work can literally speak for itself, and they'll do a fabulous job on executing and being a bit directive with people and getting fabulous results. They're amazing at those roles. Mm-hmm. But the next step often requires some subtleties around how they push people, or around when they decide not to push people, or around how they focus on the strategic side. And we give code words out. We say, be more strategic, raise your profile, mm-hmm. Build your network, have greater executive presence. And that is, just to quote from the millennials, lazy feedback.
Yeah.
What on earth does it mean to be strategic? So it's no help. It may be accurate, but it's no help. So we've got to give women the feedback we need. We need to be able to tell them these messages a little bit earlier, and then dissect them. What do I mean by being strategic? Who is being strategic? Who's not being strategic? What model do you follow? Where does executive presence showing up? How did you do it? How did you not do it? It's unpack that so she can begin to develop the skills before she's getting criticized for not having them.
Right.
And that's the feedback women need, and they need it early.
How do you get that? Is it a matter of getting the right mentorship? Is it a matter of having champions in the organization? Where do you get that feedback from?
Anywhere you can is my answer to the equation.
Fair enough.
So I say to managers of the women that I work with, give the feedback. Even if you have to give it lazy or you give it badly, I'll help digest it, but at least tell her. Because if you don't tell her, there's no starting point. So start there. Mm-hmm. Even if you have to say, look, you need to be more strategic. I don't know how to tell you to do that, but this person over here does a good job. Go watch what they do. At least that's a starting point, okay?
Yeah.
Now, the second thing is women can take control of this. The big issues are about profile, networks, style of communication, and being strategic.
Right.
Go ask, and ask specifically, how am I doing? And you can ask a boss, you can ask a peer, you can ask a mentor, you can ask a sponsor. Any one of them can help. So either side can drive that equation. But we can't keep our head buried in the sand and then say, oh, well, we picked the wrong talent. Bah humbug on that.
Right. Yeah. What is, I'm fascinated by your new book, You Can't Know It All. I think this is certainly a topic to me that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about. And for me, the premise was, we're a lot of technical people move into management without the skills needed to really get to be great managers. And I wanted to sort of get into that a little bit. How do you move from sort of a technical competence and a technical expertise where you're leading a technical team and you're great at that, to all of a sudden getting larger responsibility, maybe for a division or maybe the whole company, and you move into a more general management role, which I know we don't like that word, but we have more responsibility, a wider responsibility, maybe outside of our technical expertise. How do you make that transition?
Okay. All right. So first, let me be clear about this. I don't think general management really exists. Because even at the CEO level, I would not take somebody who has zero industry experience, zero experience at this scale, zero experience with our kind of customer set, and plop them in. I don't care how good their management skills are. So we're always bringing some technical expertise to the jobs that we're doing.
Right.
So the better way to think about it is it's not just an expert or what I call a spanning outside your expertise. It's a hybrid. We're doing some of both.
Right.
So now here I am, let's say I'm an IT professional and I know some aspect of the IT inside out, thoroughly up one side and down the other. I can solve everything that needs to be solved in that area. And now you're going to get promoted over several areas in IT and a lot of interface with clients, let's say, a very common thing that's happening to our IT professionals.
Right.
Now I've got a span, and I'm going to speak to areas that I don't know anything about really, and I'm going to manage technical people who fundamentally know a heck of a lot more than I will ever know. The tendency is to dig in and try to become the expert in those new areas, but that's offensive. Someone in that expertise wants to showcase what they've got. They spent 10 years becoming an expert. How dare you think, dear manager, you're going to learn it in 6 months? And then it's kind of like, well, go ahead, show me if you can. So that's the wrong way to go. The hardest thing for this transition when you're leading outside your area of expertise is to understand how you add value. When I'm the expert, I add value because I can help you solve the problems. I can help you think through the issues. I know some of the answers. I know where to point you. When I'm outside my area of expertise, none of that is how I add value. I add value through connections, through communications, through bigger picture, through inspiration, and it's elusive. So getting my head as a manager around what's the value that I'm bringing to this team now is the number one step. If you can get that straight, then we can figure out how to do it.
Are there some muscles or some skills that you see as useful and should be sort of once you know that you're going to be leading a broader team, that you really should start working on some things that
Well, one of the fundamental things that changes is how you communicate and relate to people. So as a technical expert, I relate on the facts and the details and the logic and the analysis. And we don't have to talk a lot about emotions, quite honestly. We probably should, but we don't have to for me to be effective as a manager.
Right.
When I'm not that technical expert manager, I'm a spanning manager, now emotions take front and center. So this whole process of getting comfortable with talking about my emotions, asking about your emotions, tuning into how people are feeling, how they're reacting to what gets said, finding better ways to say it to get better reactions, that's the skill. That's the core skill. And that you can
vulnerability, right? And showing
all of it.
Showing that you don't know everything.
Exactly.
And that you ask good questions.
Right. And letting somebody else be right on occasion.
Okay.
Right. They might have a perspective you haven't thought about, even when you are an expert. So all of those are good things. The other thing you can work on now is learning to develop people to do the jobs you're asking them to. So we always talk about delegating. It's a bad word. I want you to focus on how do you lead people to understand how to improve their skills.
Okay.
How do you coach them, in effect, is
Right.
what we're getting for.
Because
Right?
you do become a coach at that point, right?
You do.
The leadership, I sort of join the two, right? You become a coach, you become a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. So when I say teacher, it implies that I know the answer, and therefore I'm helping you discover it, or I'm teaching you the answer. And I can do that as an expert leader. But when I'm spanning, it's a pure coaching relationship. I
Right.
have to be really good at asking questions to stimulate you to think, or I have to be really good at connecting you with people who can help you think differently.
Right.
That's my value add.
What is in that case? I mean, you've come up with a coaching process for this, if I'm not mistaken, or a model. Maybe a coaching model is the best way to put it. I mean, do you recommend corporations and businesses look at coaching as a way to help sort of this transition?
I think it's a fabulous way to help this transition.
Okay.
Completely. I also think it's a really important thing to teach people to coach. And I don't mean teaching them a classic grow model. I mean teaching them how to ask questions that stimulate other people to think. I think that's the core skill we need to focus on in teaching.
What would coaching for this kind of look like?
Okay. All right. So for me, it always starts with understanding now what's your value going to be. It's not what you thought it was, getting your head around that one. And then the second one is getting your head around what is the work you now have to do. You're enabling your team. What does that work look like? And that means, how am I growing my team? How am I developing my team? How am I coaching my team? So the team feels like they're getting something of value. And then the last part has to do with all the subtleties of how we relate. So typically what I like to do is to give people some information about their style or their personality or their approach, not because they don't know themselves, but because it gives them a language to compare their way with somebody else's way, and to be able to embrace a different way, because that's the secret. And then we dig into this: how do you get comfortable with emotions? And then how do we get the messages in a concise and more compelling way? And we sort of work through the skills it takes now to lead in this different way.
What is when you're looking at, or when, as a corporation or a business, how would I sort of approach bringing on a coach for this kind of work? I mean, are there great questions to ask when you're sort of trying to figure out who's the best fit for you in this way?
Well,
You've
first
been
of
through
all,
a lot, so I'm just kind of
yeah,
curious, as you know,
yeah.
if I'm hiring somebody, there are a lot of coaches out there and a lot of people who.
Yeah. It's hard to know, because the words I'm going to say don't make a whole lot of, I mean, it's hard to distinguish people on this factor, but it is a chemistry fit.
Okay.
The person that I'm coaching has to feel comfortable with me, like they can be honest with me and trust me, or else it's no go. And I think if you're hiring me, you need to be sure that I understand something about how your business runs, because otherwise I want to give you bad advice. And I think you have to have a coach who understands something about the political context in which people are operating, as well as all of these skills that are needed. So it's not that I'm hiring a coach for one thing, it's that I'm hiring a coach with a multitude of skills that can now turn up and help the individual focus on where they need to focus.
Right.
I think those are the core things, but it's often hard to know how effective somebody's going to be until you bring them in and try them.
Right. And that sort of chemistry piece is probably really important, I think. So I wanted to look at questions. Let's see. I got Amy. Thanks, Amy, for commenting. Mooney, I think is your name. If I mispronounced it, I'm sorry. Thank you for joining us. My friend Eugene Frazier, how are you, my friend? He says, I love this approach. Let's see if I can pull up the rest of the question. It's not open. His question is not opening for me, but he says, I love this approach to communications for leaders. This is great methodology. And I think I'm missing the end of that sentence. I got cut off. But thank you guys for commenting today. I want to ask you about, we kind of briefly touched on it, about communications and relationships. What are some things, easy ways that we can create better relationships in the workplace, aside from the lunch and maybe a walk and a sitting down with the employees? Are there some things that you've seen in your coaching and in your experience that really make people feel like the leadership cares, that the leadership is? Are there some things that you recommend that you've seen, other things that people can easily put in place?
Okay, so we've already talked about knowing something about the individual as an individual. What are their interests outside of work? So I have some common ground, something to chat with them about. Those are the seeds for building trust.
Right.
And then spending your time, we've talked about that, distributing it around. So you show I care. We've talked about having growth conversations, even if it's not about career progress, it's what's the person want to learn next.
Yeah.
Can I provide those opportunities? But in addition to that, you got to be willing to adapt.
Okay.
If you're the kind of manager who says it's my way and only my way, and either get on board or get out, you're going to have everybody, you're not going to have a broad range and best of thinking and the most inspired leaders. So the best leaders, the best managers are constantly looking for one refinement that's going to give them an adaptation that gets that message a little stronger and a little clearer and connects with people in a better way. So that willingness to adapt is number 2. And I swear number 3 is to stop the judgment. We have judgments coming and going about people. That person is not something. And I often say if you're using a noun or an adjective, it's a judgment.
Okay.
If it's a verb, you're in good shape. So focus on the doing, acting, saying stuff and jettison your opinions out there. I think goes a long way, because then when people don't feel judged, they feel like, okay, now I can tell you what I think and now we can talk.
And that's hard. That's hard though. That's hard, isn't it?
That's hard work. It takes, that is maybe the hardest work of all, especially with somebody who sort of, flips my switches and kind of pushes my buttons. Ooh, man, can that be hard work?
Yeah. I almost say, I'd have to, the way to sort of stop doing that is you have to maybe write it down every time you catch yourself, using that kind of language. Right. And I mean, to me, I'd like, if I did that and I saw how many times a day I was judgmental, I think that's the only way I would try to work on. You have to learn to catch yourself in that language, I think.
Yeah, right. If you just take the phrase, that person is blank, and never use that sentence structure again, it won't solve everyone, but I bet you it gets 50% of them.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think that's also, it's such a morale killer, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think what you wonder is, what does that manager say behind my back? Or what does that manager say? It goes to trust. It goes to all kinds of other culture issues.
We also need to look at it in talent reviews. One of my pet peeves, when we're assessing talent and identifying who our potentials are, those meetings are usually rife with judgments.
Yeah.
Some of which are grounded in some details and some of which are grounded in the wrong details. So just kind of trying to stop that, and that would give us a lot better place to give good feedback as well. So that's another, but you're right, it takes a lot of work to get there.
Are there any other takeaways from the book that you think are important?
There's pages of takeaways, Rhett. How can I possibly summarize 200 pages in one sentence?
Your top 2 that I missed.
I think the biggest thing is to recognize what kind of a role you're in and how much of my job needs to be content driven. And that's what's going to drive my confidence and my speaking, my communication, my persuasion. And how much of this job is something else, where I have to lean in on the communication, the relationships, and the trust, and the emotional intelligence, and all of that. And I find lots of times, you'll have 80% content and 20% not, or you might have 50-50, or you might have the opposite, 30-70. Just getting some advice about where is it that I am in my role today, and how do I expand beyond that is an important step.
Right. Well, the last question I always ask people is, what's the best advice you ever got, and who did you get it from?
Oh my goodness. Ooh, the best advice I've ever gotten. Wow, I was not prepared for that one. Of all the things, I think about all the times that I've gone to people and said, should I take this move? And the answer has been no.
Well, something that's memorable, some some advice or something you got at some point in your life that was really valuable.
Can I tell a story?
Absolutely.
I had a former boss who said to me once, geez, Wanda, it must be strange that you used to trade on your intellect and you now trade on charm. And I have to tell you that I was deeply offended by that comment.
Okay.
Deeply offended because, you know, how smart I am matters to me, right? I didn't mean I'm trading on charm. I left my brain at the table. I mean, I just was deeply offended. It turns out he's right, because he's talking about exactly what I'm speaking about in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just how much I know, it's also the charm, how I relate to people, how comfortable I make them with me. It took me 3 years to figure out what he meant by that and get over my annoyance with him. But it was really smart advice.
It's I was talking to somebody the other day that those soft skills that I guess he was talking about, those aren't really soft skills. I mean, those are. I tell my son all the time, you can get so much. I sound like my mother talking, my Southern mother, telling me manners are everything, and you can get so far on your manners. But it really is true. And
absolutely. Look, if I leave people feeling better at the end of a conversation, it's going to be a much more productive exchange.
Indeed.
So, what's wrong with leaving people feeling better?
Nothing. They're willing to help you if they feel good about you, right? They're willing to go to bat and to work with you, and it just makes things much more pleasant.
That's right. That's right. Now, that doesn't mean avoid the hard messages, but I still can leave people feeling better as opposed to humiliated, embarrassed, and all those other things.
Right. There's a good way to do that and the wrong way to do that. And even more so today, we get a lot of that in society. And well, thank you so much for being on the program. This has been a lot of fun and very educational. You can get the book, You Can't Know It All, Leading in an Age of Deep Expertise. I think you can probably get that everywhere books are sold. And and we'll put the link up on the feed after the program here. But go out and get that book, because it's a great read. And particularly if you are transitioning from technical leadership into a broader management role, I think it's a really, really, really important read, and a good read for everyone. In fact, I think that's making that leadership transition. If you like the program, give it a like or share. If you want to find out about upcoming shows, please do that. You can do that on the website, powerlunch.live, powerlunch.live. A couple things about the website. We're starting to upload these episodes into podcast. So the new podcast uploads are there. You can find past shows on the site as well, and our YouTube channel. So you can get all the content that we've ever done via podcast or just the video shows themselves. And we do appreciate you spending some time with us today. Dr. Wallace, Wanda, thank you so much for joining us. And next time you get a book out, we'd love to have you back on to talk more. And
hey, I'll be back. Thank you very much.
I'd love to dig into maybe even having a show just on questions that you should ask as an employee, because I think that's taking your own development into your own hands, I think, is a really interesting topic, and something maybe we should maybe have a panel, a show just with a panel and talk about those kind of things. I think that would be fun.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.